Here we have a town called La Quinta, and people are not from around here when they say, "Oh, hey, we were visiting La Quinta." And it's just like,
Uh,
"Okay, great.
Yeah,
You're
that's
definitely not a
yeah.
local." Or they say Coachella.
oh, that's definitely for
That's
What
a
do
dead giveaway.
a tourist.
what do people call La Quinta?
La Quinta
I'm
sometime.
gonna co- I'm going off camera because I'm gonna walk.
Bye,
Okay.
Raj.
Bye, Ron.
Sounds
Bye,
good.
Raj.
Okay. Oh, good. I'm glad we're recording that so we can offend more people. Okay, good. All right. I think today's a very exciting day in the Surrender Experiment, Chapter 8. Hi, Mary. Welcome.
Hi, Mary.
Good to
Hi
see you.
guys.
Hi,
Um,
Mary.
Great.
there's lots of really good stuff in here today. Angie, where did you have stuff? And if so, where? So we can kind of
Mm,
plan that out.
Um, there's so much stuff.
Okay. Well, then here, you can just pipe in as we go.
Okay.
You got a haircut.
Yeah, it looks good.
It looks
thank you.
great. Yeah.
It was well past time. It was starting to get like, I was afraid somebody was going to issue me a ticket or something for being unkempt. I think last time, Angie, you want to lead us in a minute of meditation? I'll do a little prayer and then we'll kick off this shindig.
Okay. Okay. All right, let's close our eyes. Get comfortable in your seat. Take a couple of deep inhales to start. Let your exhale be a second longer than your inhale. And we'll just relax here for a moment. Very good work. Let's turn it over to Evan for our prayer.
God, universe, higher power, source, whatever you want to call it, however you relate to it, we open ourselves to you. Help us to listen deeply to that inner voice inside of us that is guiding us all the time, that wants to teach us and show us new ways of living and being. Help us to go as deep as feels safe and as comfortable today. Help us see new things that open our eyes, that open the windows to our soul. Help us let go of things that are blocking us from seeing the truth. And the truth is, we are okay right now and always. And that life is good. And that the pain comes from our body, mind, emotions reacting to deeply held untruths. Help us to turn all of this over to you so that you can sort it out, and help us just to relax and be held in your presence. Amen. All right. I'm going to share my screen here just to get started. Okay, so he just went off to Mexico and had some pretty interesting experiences in trusting his intuition and not believing his mind as it created all sorts of drama or wanted to pull him into drama. So this is a bit of a breakthrough for him. And so then he comes back, and I marked a couple things here in the beginning because I didn't so much resonate with this, but I thought it was interesting. And I wonder how many of you resonate with this. All I needed in my life was solitude, the discipline of my ever increasing practices, and a minimal amount of food. Like that seems a little on the rare side to me. Like this guy's just, it's almost like he wants to sort of shut out the world completely. And I think a big part of his journey is realizing, and he even says it at one point in this chapter, but a big part of his journey, is realizing that all of life is there for you, that it's like the truth of life is not just found in the solitude of meditation. That's a little bit of a spoiler, but this is where he's at right now. He's and maybe this is appropriate, right? To just say, I want to whittle my life down just to be able to hear. But new things show up. So, we'll sort of watch that unfold. Nothing was left in me that wanted to be an economics professor. For me, well, I guess before we move on from that last one, did anybody want to say anything? Has anybody here ever craved solitude and wanted to disappear from the world? I mean, the way that my sort of mechanism body system works is I always want to be a success in the world. I always want to like so it's like I've never really had this craving to completely disappear, although I do have, a very sort of serious, you know, um practice of going inside. How about anybody else? Anybody else wanted just to completely drop the world and go live in a mountain in the Himalayas? Yeah, Natasha, you have?
Yeah, all the time.
R- Right, but you're such an in the world kind of person.
Well, I like living in a city where I can do things if I want to. But for
Yeah.
example, when I did my in-home meditation retreat, it was really hard. I wished I was away, like on a solitary mountain with no distraction for sure.
Right. Right, but you're not really organizing your life to do that per se. You're not like moving out to the mountains to be alone like this guy.
Yeah, no, I'd kill myself.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It's like it's pretty interesting. This guy just wanted to go
Yeah,
full force into this,
yeah.
Nothing was left in me that wanted to be an economics professor. This I can certainly relate to. I mean, I've certainly been phases in my life where something seemed so important. And as I've grown, I've outgrown certain things. Certainly this death grip I had on being a filmmaker and having to succeed in that way. Otherwise, there was no point in living. It's like, I wouldn't say there's no part of me that wants to be a filmmaker, but I'm not tied to it in the same way because the rest of my life is so much more meaningful and full. I'm not willing to throw all that away per se. Okay, so those are just warm-ups. Right, so we get to this idea a little bit earlier than I thought, right? So this is a little bit of a flash forward. I would eventually learn that everything in life has something to teach you and that it is all for your growth. So again, as we've looked into this book, we've seen that it very much mirrors the things that we talk about here. Every single thing that happens to you, especially every single disturbance, is there for you to help wake you up. It's almost like all these pains and stuff are like little alarm clocks. Like my son, he sets 5 alarms in the morning to wake himself up, right? And so it's like all these pains that we have are just the alarms, that we need to wake ourselves out of this deep sort of slumber that we're caught in. So he goes back, he says, he said, but I was not ready to see that yet, which we're pointing to. It's right. So it's like, here's this guy who's had these tremendous spiritual experiences and even awakenings, and yet there's still things that are closed to him. So just to reinforce that idea is there's very rarely an entire spiritual awakening. There's usually a huge opening. And in those openings, and I'm sure you've all felt this, it's like you feel so good and you feel so great. You feel like I'm done. I've completed the whole thing, right? Only to find out that this was in a lot of cases, a momentary window into a future that you're moving toward, but that there's still plenty of parts of the ego that are still very much holding on to things and pulling us back into the mire. Yeah, Ange?
Yeah, I had this highlighted too, and I just like reflecting on my life. I couldn't see any of this at the time, but now doing this work and reflecting back, I could see how things happened for me to teach me, and how many times and how often I didn't have that awareness and that understanding. And so now I'm being taught again because I didn't get it, and it shows up again and again. So,
Yeah, and that's really great. And there's really value, I think, going backwards and looking in the past and seeing that, because anything that you can have, and this lies outside of being immersed in spirit, and it has a little bit more to do with experience, right? If you've gone through so many of these things and you look back and you go, oh God, that was there to teach me something, you can start to use that information to go, oh, this thing that I'm going through right now, even though my mind is telling me my life is over and I'm dying, etc., is probably here for me. And so, this isn't a step kind of thing per se, but I really like that part in the 12 and 12 where it says, we soon take quite another view of this absolute humiliation. And I've expanded that for myself to any upset or any hurt. I soon take quite another view of this annoyance. I soon take quite another view of this irritation. I soon take quite another view of this dread. Me becoming aware of these things, it's pointing out where I'm off base. We were talking yesterday about sin, right? Which is this heavy, heavy word. But, I think the real meaning of that word, because it means to miss the mark. And I think if I were to translate that just a hair further, to miss the point. I think that sin is I'm seeing it incorrectly. I'm misperceiving it, right? I'm misperceiving it. And so I'm off base. And it just means you're kind of going down the wrong path. Not you will be damned eternally to hell, but you're just kind of heading in the wrong direction. And if we use these pains in our lives as a sort of notice to be like, hey, you're in pain because you're misperceiving this, you're not seeing reality, you're caught in some kind of misperception. Let's use that pain as a way to wake up from the misperception, right? And so in this way, pairing with what he's saying, every single thing in our lives is there to help us awaken to the real purpose of life. The real purpose of life is not to be successful in life, is not to accumulate money and relationships and all of this, but it's to become aware of the pure joy and love that is already inside of you, that has always been inside of you. And then, of course, which is why we prioritize it this way, as you connect with that, well, then those things do come to you. If you're in this great mood all the time, people want to be around you. They're more likely to want to go into business with you, right? It's not rocket science. There's, again, I'm quoting way too much outside literature, but in the Bible, there's this great saying, which is, "Seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all these things will be added unto you," right? So it's spirit first. And then when you're resonating at that level, it's going to draw the good toward you because you're going to be resonating, you're going to be vibrating in this good place, right? But when we try to do it the other way, when we try to create goodness from fear, when we try to create great results from terror, it's very hard to do. And in a lot of ways, inefficient, counterproductive. Okay, I definitely wasn't seeing my schoolwork as relevant to my inner work. And so he goes on to sort of explore this, right? He's saying schoolwork is not part of what I want to do now. What I want to do now is meditate all the time and I want to become awakened or whatever. So he sees his professor who he really adores and he says, go try and finish this schoolwork. And he shows up to class every once in a while with bare feet. And he has this one teacher who who hates him. And he says, you can't expect to get a good grade. And he somehow convinces this guy to basically say, let my test scores and what I do on this paper be the determination of what my grade is. And the guy agrees, right? So now he has to write this paper, but of course he hasn't studied that much. He's shown up, right? He's obviously got a good mind. He's obviously a pretty smart cat, right? I began by telling myself that I really didn't care what grade I got in the class, since I probably wouldn't finish my degree anyway. This removed any mental or emotional pressure. So that's a really interesting thing right there. Right. So what he's essentially doing is consciously detaching. He's basically saying, okay, I surrender. There's a surrender right there. I'm going to do this. It could totally fail. I could get a bad grade or not. He's in acceptance of this, right? And this allows him to operate more freely. This is like a really good notion for all of us. Now, in a lot of cases, we have parts that cannot surrender, and that's fine. But if we can sort of look to, if we can be aware that those parts, are not the real us, we can start to begin to surrender them. We can do whatever steps we can take to sort of activate that surrender and that non-attachment. So here's another principle that we very much use here. But so he says he just sits down and he just starts writing whatever. So now notice when we talk about habits and building habits in our community, we talk about doing a very little bit, getting started, because getting started is the hardest thing. So he says, I told myself, just start writing the paper, writing whatever I thought about the topic. I had no books to refer to, just writing a flow of thoughts. But he got started. He didn't sit around and think about it. He just got started. I did not worry about what I was writing or second guess my thoughts. It was very much like meditation. I kept my personal self out of it completely and just let unbridled inspiration flow. So because I've done a fair amount of writing, one of the most difficult things with writing is to turn off the inner critic. Is to be able just to write and just be an acceptance of whatever's coming out, good or bad, and just let it flow. But he's dropping into this place here. And then he says this. So again, notice how these pair. At some point in the process, a flash of inspiration welled up inside of me. I went from not knowing what I was going to do with the paper to knowing exactly what I was going to write. But notice he started writing without an idea and just got started, and then the inspiration struck. And this has been my experience when it comes to writing and creating, which is a little bit of a sidebar, but kind of not in a way, because we're learning in this community to get started. Just do something simple. You don't have to do something amazing. And then it builds on itself. So like my workout, which started as one push-up, now is this whole big thing. It grew by itself because I got started. So learning how to get started with something. Like one of my new practices that I'm really enjoying is as I'm sitting down for my workday, I sit and I do 5 minutes worth of numbers, adding stuff up and getting clear about my finances. And it's like taking a shower. It's like I feel so cleansed afterward that it gives me actually momentum going into my workday, which is kind of cool. But it's that same idea is I'm just getting started instead of this big, huge thing. I can never get it done. Get started and then allow the inspiration to show up as you get into movement. Okay, this is really interesting and I think really powerful. At first, no thoughts were involved. It was more of a feeling, just a definitive knowing that I now knew where the paper was going and how to get there. And so for me, I would say this is one of the things that we're all working on is developing this relationship to our intuition to where we have a knowing. And that knowing may or may not show up in words, and oftentimes it doesn't. Like I remember very clearly, it was about a year and a half ago when I just, after a long time of not knowing where I was going next or what I was going to do, I got the very clear feeling it was time to start doing the workshops and all of that. I thought I was going to do this, 5 or 10 years from now. I didn't think I was going to start at this age. But it was clearly time, and I just knew it was time, right? So but I've spent the last 20 years developing that intuition and listening so that when something big comes through, I can hear it and I can recognize it. So that's what we're all working on doing is developing that relationship and that listening so that when we quiet the other voices so we can hear this, right? And so this guy's been doing a ton of meditation, so he's able to tap into that inspiration. Then the thoughts began to form. They came slowly at first, then they poured into my mind. So notice it was a feeling first, a sense, and then the thoughts came. I'm going to pause here. I don't know if anybody wants to sort of say anything or pitch in. If anytime anybody wants to say anything, I think I can see everybody. Can I see everybody? Yeah, I can see everybody. Just put your hand up if you have something you want to throw in here. Anyone? Because I can keep going. God knows I can keep going. Yeah, Ange?
I was just gonna say, I haven't had this experience with writing because I'm not a writer, but I had this experience and kind of shared about it a while ago, like, and I sound kind of corny saying this because I'm not a dancer, but I've had this kind of spiritual experience, you know, out on the dance floor dancing where I don't know what I'm doing and I'm not thinking about it, but something comes over me and I'm just doing all kinds of dancing and things and it's like pretty good. But like I'm not doing I'm just there. I'm just feeling the music. I don't have to think about it.
That's awesome. Yeah, I wouldn't discount that, right? Because we can step into the flow of life in any area, and the more areas we do, the better. I'm the most self-conscious dancer on the face of the planet. I'm like the worst. I'm in my head going, should I do that? Yeah, kind of thing. So that's a beautiful thing, and you can use that to inform all the things you do, right? Because that is that state. I mean, there's whole books written about this kind of flow state. And if you're an athlete at all, you really understand this state. You know, it's this kind of Zen place, this no mind place where you're just in action and the mind disappears. And that's really what we want. That's how we want to live. You know, Eckhart Tolle said, you know, somebody asked him if like what his greatest accomplishment was. And he said, I have the power to not think when I choose. Now, I was just like, that's cool. Okay, Raj and then Mary.
Walking, so sorry if it's
No worries at all, man. That's fine.
cool. No, I just want to kind of just share. First of all, it's awesome, and I wanted to share like how you were talking about um
Did he freeze or is he gathering his
He
thoughts?
froze. He froze. Oh,
Okay, we'll come back to you, Raj. See if you can get your stuff, get your stuff together over there. Okay, Mary, you go ahead.
Hi, I had an experience where during sort of the end of the pandemic, I took a sculpting class in
Ooh,
person, and it was like the stimulation of being in. I didn't realize being in lockdown was so isolating for me. And then when I went into community and started creating, I'd never sculpted before with clay. And I just remember my brain did exactly what he's explaining. I mean, I didn't know what I was creating, but it was just this place where I went that I didn't realize that I could go to within the creative mind and just letting go of, I'm not sure even how to explain it, but it was the creative process, I think, and just
sure.
really kind of being with community and creating. And it was just like I was so hungry for something I didn't know I wanted or needed. So it was profound. And I
Yeah.
think it was in relation to being so isolated and not around people during COVID. But I can identify with the creative, like it pours out of you and you're not thinking, you're just creating.
That's great. That's great. I mean, absolutely. And you know, the thing that's great about that is it's a touch point for you. It's a touch point
Mhm.
for you being in contact with this expression that is kind of mindless and sort of happens through you. You sort of, I mean, was it your experience at all that you kind of felt like channeling, like it was just coming through you?
In some ways, because it was like having a new experience. So I'd never done it before. So there's that, the beginner's mind. No expectations, like I'm just going to do this because I feel willing to be in community and create. And then it was like this profound experience, and it didn't change my life, but I did something I'd never done before, which was I felt willing to do something that I didn't know I was good at, bad at. I had no idea.
Right.
So,
Well, there's that whole Zen beginner's mind thing, you know, you kind of opened
mm-hmm.
up into that thing. Yeah, it's very cool. And
Yeah.
I would say use that. I mean, use that as a gauge. It's like, okay, when I'm doing something else, it's like, how similar is it to this? And, you know, how engaged is my mind? And can I let go of that? I mean, one of the ways that I really discovered the power of this was in writing, because this whole habits thing that we do inside of this community is really built on the back of me writing every day, just about every day for 10 years.
Mhm.
Talk about a practice and talk about like what can happen inside that. And you just start to get good at showing up. And I'm sure it'd be the same with anything you do, whether it be yoga or whatever. You start to, when you can show up, you start to tap into things more. Um,
Right. And
and
for
so go ahead.
right, no, no, and just like what we're doing right now, I think what was important for me is to be in community to do it. Being in isolation and doing it alone, I don't have as much of it's not as profound for me as when I'm doing it with others and I can look at their work, we talk, that was the food that was really, it
A
was
hundred
feeding
percent.
me.
I was gonna touch on that too, because you touched very much on community. And I was talking to somebody yesterday, and it's like the power of community cannot be, overstated.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, we know from 12 step,
Mm-hmm.
but there's another energy that shows up or that gets amplified when we're in connection, especially with other people who are resonating at a frequency that we want, that where we are or where we want to go.
Right. And it felt like play a little bit. Like, what does it feel like to
Yes.
play?
Yes.
Um, which is a child of alcoholic parents. It wasn't like the play was not a big, place for me that I really understood. So I can only sort of relate it to what it must have felt like in that
That's
regard.
really interesting. I'm wondering by show of hands, how many people felt like play was okay in their lives, or play wasn't okay? Raise your hands if play was not okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's right. And so the fact that you could, and that's very much what I've experienced when, like in acting class or something, there's all this
Mhm.
self-consciousness that an actor has, whatever. But when they break into it, it's like all of a sudden they can play inside of the notes and all of that. And there's this freedom and flexibility and this no worry. So it's like these places that we can tap into. And
Mhm.
and it's like that I really believe that's really how life is sort of meant to be, to have this sort of sense of we're safe and we can just kind of play, but
Mhm.
we're all so serious and so like fettered.
Right.
Odelia, did you want to say anything? Did you have
No,
your
I
hand?
was just
Oh,
I had my hand up for the play thing.
oh,
Mhm.
okay, okay, good, good, good. So thank you for sharing that, Mary.
Mhm.
Yeah, and that's interesting. I wonder if we should do something in our community, where we get together and we explore something creative in that way. That might be kind of an interesting thing. So Angie, let's you and I talk about it. Um, and if anybody has any ideas, by all means, send them to me. Okay, so let's see. Raj, did you come back online? Or are you still missing in action? Okay. So when artists create a work, they first get the inspiration and they bring it down to the physical plane. I really relate to this a lot. There's something else I wanted to, there's so many things popping into my head. There's one thing I want to touch on too. Um, we all have had, a lot of spiritual experiences throughout our lives. And in some cases, we didn't sort of know it then, but we can kind of look back. And you were touching on that a little bit, Angie. But I remember, so this idea that he had of detaching, I remember back when I was 27 and my life was just an absolute train wreck at 27. Um, and had gotten so bad for me that I dropped into this place, and my thinking about it then was a little bit warped, but it's just interesting to see how this stuff is always trying to come through us. So the place I ended up was apathy is power. That was the place. Now, I would say that very differently today because it was this kind of conscious, like, screw everything kind of nihilism. But there was a surrender in that, right? It was like I didn't give an F and I wasn't holding on. And so it's just interesting to see that even in a state like that, there's a divine truth that's wanting to come through, which is, yeah, don't be attached to things. Don't hold on to things. And, in our language now, we can say, and become very aware of the parts that are attached so that we can start to see through them. But so, okay, this whole thing, when artists create a work, they first get inspiration. So I'm going to share this idea with you, and you guys can tell me what you think of this. But so when I started to become a screenwriter, it was very problematic for me because I felt so much pressure all the time. So it was like, okay, first I have to have a great idea. Then I have to have 100 really, really good supporting ideas. And so underneath the pressure of all this, I was frozen. I was paralyzed. I couldn't sit down and write. I was stuck. And so as I began the practice of just writing every day, and then stuff started to show up, something new started to emerge. And what I started to realize is, or I had this insight, it was like, no, this thing that wants to get written actually has nothing to do with me. It's almost like it's this, like babies get born into human bodies, right? And there are other spiritual entities that get born into this world as movies or scripts or different things. But they're already there. And this sense that I had of this was very kind of real. And it was like when you sort of do this work, it's like the idea kind of chooses you as its shepherd. And anybody who's done a lot of creative work over time is very aware of this whole collective consciousness, right? Where if you have an idea and you don't write it down, you can pretty much guarantee within 6 months to 2 years, you're going to see somebody else has written that song or that movie or whatever. And you almost never like it. And you wish that you would have moved forward and done your thing, right? So it's like these things in this other world, let's say, they want to be born on this plane, right? And so they choose who they think is going to be a good shepherd. And so if your energy is receptive, you open to this, and the better you listen, so it really became, the whole process became about listening for me. And it took all the pressure off me because I didn't have to come up with anything. I didn't have to be smart or bright, and I just kept opening myself, and more stuff would come through. And so it was a complete letting go of me as the author and me surrendering to this other greater force. And which again, same kind of thing happens when I play pickleball, etc. And I'm sure the same thing happens for all of you. And this is the kind of place where we want to get all of our activities in life, ideally, that we're coming from this place of inspiration and, as Mary said so well, fun and play in there. Okay. So that's it. That's just an interesting aside about all of that. But I think he talks, let's see. So he goes on to talk about in this paper, it came from the place that art comes from, right? Inspiration, not logic, which is really interesting. I wonder. Okay. So he goes on to finish it. Okay. I had clearly seen the difference between creative inspiration and logical thought. And that's in my little orange color here, because that's something that I want to spend some time on. We are generally, all of us, caught in logical thought, which if you attended the Free Your Mind workshop, you'll know that logical thought cannot contain real truth, right? At best, thought is this abstract, two-dimensional representation, like a hand drawing of some reality. It can't give you the whole picture. But living in this creative inspiration, you're touching this different plane. You're touching what in the big book they would call the fourth dimension. And that is the experience of living that I think we should all be aspiring to, and that we do when we sort of take this book seriously and when we take the journey seriously. We're living from that fourth dimension. I think in the Bible it says, "Be ye in the world, but not of the world." And being in this state does not inhibit us from interacting with people. It's not like we lose the ability to say what needs to be said. In fact, that ability is enhanced and made easier. Like how many people are scared of chit chat or small talk? But to be so in a place where you're surrendered, where that can happen easily and you're not worried about it. It's like that's a place. And so it's not this leaving reality, it's just rising above it. I think the analogy I used recently was like, do you think you're a more effective Monopoly player if you believe that you are the piece? Or do you think you have more objectivity and a better handle on things if you are the player moving the piece around the board? If you're the piece and you're like the little car, you're like, oh shit, watch out, you know. But if you're the human being playing the game, you have this detached. And so that's what we want to do. We want to rise above our human experience, not to deny the human experience, right? We've talked a lot about that. We're not trying to transcend the human experience by denying it. In fact, we're doing the opposite. We're transcending the human experience by going into the body, into the physical sensations, more into the reality of what's actually happening, and starting to see the mind. Then the next thing I marked down here, I knew where thoughts came from. And I'm like, okay, that's great, man. Please enlighten me. Where do thoughts come from? I'd like to meet the person who knows where thoughts come from. Because the more I study and the more I explore, I do not have any kind of answer for where thoughts come from. To be honest, if I had to say where thoughts came from, I'd say my first most likely candidate is trauma. Because when you don't have that trauma part experience, your mind gets very quiet. So I almost view thoughts as like a sign of our own addiction to our own trauma in a way. But that's a more far-ranging conversation. But where did inspiration come from? It came from a much deeper place than where I witnessed the thoughts. 100%. Even in the big book, they talk about living by inspiration and intuition as a real way to navigate your life. So that's what we're talking about here. And that's what the surrender is. You see, the mind cannot choose to do that. We can choose to start to surrender and live from that place. The mind does not want to do that. The mind does not want to live in the fourth dimension because it does not exist in the fourth dimension. It is trying to convince you. Oh, I had this really interesting realization. I want to write a post about this morning. So does anybody have like a voice in their head that says, I'm an idiot, I'm stupid, anything like that? Okay. Have you noticed that sometimes it says, I am stupid, and other times it says you were stupid? Explain that to me. How do we get any kind of bearing on what that voice is in reality if in one moment it's saying I, and the next moment it's saying you? That's really confusing, isn't it? Because if that voice is me, then it would always say I. How could it also say you if that's me? Because that's not me. That's the whole point of this, is the ego takes the word I, and in the last day on the Free Your Mind workshop, we talked about I being the first lie. Anytime your mind says I, it is a lie. Now that's a pretty deep concept, which we don't have the time to sort of go into today. But just this notion, there's always something deeper and more true than thought. Always, always, always. And that's what we're trying to tap into. And that's what we are surrendering to. And what are we surrendering? We're surrendering this ego, these parts, and this belief in and identification with the parts. These parts are so badly wanting to enthrall us in their drama. Like, what's the point of a thought you are an idiot? Except to get a reaction, right? And to get involved in that junk. And that junk is where the mind gets its power. Oh my gosh. Okay, we're at the end of the chapter. We have not done. Are we getting faster, Ange? Seems like we are. Okay, so we can just open this up and we can sort of have a far-ranging discussion. We can also go back and touch on anything that we want to. Does anybody have any sort of comments first or any questions to start off on the second half? We can also end early if everybody's ready to take a nap. Natasha is not ready for a nap. Okay. Okay, any thoughts or questions? Ange?
I was just gonna say that so his purpose is to meditate. And this professor is looking he doesn't care anymore about finishing his degree, but this professor looks out for him. And it's kind of the theme throughout the book. Like, all I want to do is meditate. And because has surrendered, all these miraculous things happen and carry him through his life and through this. And this is just one example with the professor. Like, he not only writes paper and gets an A in the course when he thinks he's going to fail, but then he's even more so than that. So if we can take this notion, or I should say if I could take this notion that I will be guided, I will be even more so better off than I can even imagine if I can just surrender.
Yes. And damn it, I had a very clear thought and I lost it. I mean, that's all very well said. Oh, yeah, this is what I wanted to say. I was going to write a post about this too. I've become convinced just in the last couple of weeks. So if anybody's done step work with me, they know I'm like, the spirit of step one is to allow what is. Spirit of step two is also allow. And the spirit of step three is listen. If I had to choose one word that would help the most in this whole journey, it would be listen. Right? Because you talk about being guided. Well, how can you be guided? You can be guided if you're listening for guidance. And listening to what? Right? And this is why I always encourage everybody to practice two-way prayer, because it's the best way I know. And different people have different methodologies, right, in different ways, but it's the most consistent way that I've seen for people to start to develop a relationship with that voice that can guide them. And I would say the whole purpose of this community that we're building here is to clear away the blocks so that we can hear that voice and that it can guide us. We're not clearing away the blocks so we can listen to one specific message and doctrine and say, this is the truth. Nothing like that. We're trying to clear away the blocks so that each of us can hear our own truth and follow that, because that's what he ends up doing here. But it's really interesting because he has this idea his whole life. And he's following it. And again, this is what the ego does. The ego says, this is the way that I'm going to get to happiness. And so it's this container. The ego says, I'm going to chase what's ever in this container because this is what's going to make me happy. And you can put anything in that container. Doesn't matter what it is. Doesn't matter how esoteric or spiritual or grounded it is. It can be a person for a relationship. It can be a car as a status symbol. It can be a house. It can be a certain dollar figure. It can be enlightenment itself. It can be spiritual progress. It doesn't really matter. The ego will chase whatever you put in this container. And we don't really put it in. It gets decided kind of for us. Where somewhere alchemically in our brain, it says, if you get this, you will be happy. And so you can see, even in his awakening, the sort of consistent awakening he's having, he still has this very strong egoic idea of, I need to go off and be by myself and meditate. That is what he's doing all the time. And notice that life is telling him the exact opposite. Life keeps intruding in and saying, no, 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 no. The whole purpose is not to just disappear from life, right? And that's what this entire book is about. So we have our ideas about where we need to go and what we need to do in order to be happy. And what we all need to do, just like him, is we need to surrender those ideas and listen to something more deeper inside of us to get where we need to go. And that's the whole ball of wax. That's the whole deal.
Evan, do you think that he couldn't have gotten to where he got with all of that deeper inner work and that meditation and the journey of that part?
Yeah, I think it was essential. I think he had to do that, right? I think, I don't think that that entire impetus to be alone and meditate was entirely ego driven. I think there was also something inside of him that was pulling him toward that. But I also think that that is true for each of us. I think there is something inside of us trying as hard as it can to pull us out of our fog into this deeper relationship. But I think, yeah, I think that quieting of the mind and all of that absolutely made a difference. But then he also got very lucky too in the way that people have. The opening chapter in the book is, he's just sitting there and he snaps and notices his mind, which
Yeah.
he could have meditated diligently for 20 years and that might not have happened. So it's really tough to say when that kind of moment is going to come along, but I don't think you can argue that that his intention and his devoutness to his practice absolutely helped him to evolve faster, if you will. 100%. Angie, did you have a question or are you just baring your teeth? Okay, good. Okay, Natasha.
I appreciated what you said earlier in the session about, I'm paraphrasing now, but it's something I learned to cultivate from you, which is that every single thing is a gift. And and now this is me adding to it, but I feel like working with you, I've learned to really develop a practice and a philosophy that everything is a gift and to find the gifts.
Yeah, I'm not really one for creating a sort of dogma or a system, right? But it's hard for me to see a problem with doing that or adopting that as a strategy, um, at least in the interim. I mean, that's essentially what religion is. Religion is do this until you actually see the truth for yourself. Most people never get to that stage because they're too busy following and believing what is being said, but every religion is trying to point to this deeper truth inside. And a lot of times it gets lost because of the nature, not because of any problem with that specific religion, but because of the nature of the human mind. The human mind always wants to say, oh, if I do this and I believe this, I will be saved, right? And so we don't want to develop that kind of attachment to an idea. It's like, okay, if I do this, I'll be saved. But as a practice, I think it's a really good idea, Natasha. I really do, to say, okay, I'm going, even if you say, I don't know whether this is true, but I'm going to look at this from the standpoint that this is here for me. And for me now, it's just I've been down this road for so long that it's not really even a question for me. For me now, I know the way I say it, and everybody knows I like to quote myself here and there, but only really two quotes. I can't remember the second one, but my favorite quote of mine for sure, by a large margin, is our next spiritual awakening begins as a problem, maybe even an explosion. So when you're cruising along and you're saying like, I was doing so good, and this kind of terrible thing happens, that is not you falling off the wagon, or this is not a problem. This is because you've done so good, because you were so open. Now this next level of healing has shown up. Right. And so it's just the next spiritual awakening that you are now ready for. Yes, Dr. Susie.
Thank you, Evan. Hi, everybody. I'm sorry I was late. Oh, so glad I
It's okay. Three
woke up.
demerits.
Well, it's me that missed out, not you guys. Um, um, one of the things as we're talking about this topic that's affected me from the book greatly, and that I'm learning from, and that occurs in my life is the way that when he's on his journey and something comes up that he didn't expect, that moment where he pauses and goes, it's not what I want to do, but it's what I'm being called to do. And, or it may or may not be what I want to do, but it's here for a reason. And so that to me is like the part of his practice that he's so consistent with,
Mm-hmm.
that changed the course of his life. And, in some ways it's probably quite small, and others it was huge. And I think it's directly related to what you're talking about, the parallel universe. Something gets put there because the universe, because he's open to his intuition, so it's coming through.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's affected how I'm living my life now. I am doing the same thing to the best of my ability, in little ways. And
Yeah.
so I appreciate that a lot about the book.
Yeah.
And to share one's personal philosophy, one of my core sayings for life is, we define ourselves by the decisions we make.
Hmm.
Like, we can say we are, it came because it's like, you can say you're friendly, you can say you're a problem solver, you could say you're this helpful, but you know what? When it comes down to it, whatever decision you make about how you show up is what defines who you are. And that, to me, is what he does. It's like all these things happen, but in that moment where he decides what action to take, that's how who he is shows up. So I'll stop there.
Yeah.
It's what was mulling in me.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Very interesting stuff. I mean, can you guys all see how you could turn this, like the thing that he does, his practice of saying yes to what shows up, you could turn that into your ego could turn that into a formula, which would be different than his intention, right? So it's very easy for the ego to get in and twist it. And that's why we have to sort of always stay open, and listening to, is this true? Is this a true path for me? Right. Um, but
Can
again,
you say more? Are you saying that? Yeah,
I'm
yeah. Can you
saying,
say more about that?
again, as a practice, it's pretty good. But you can take anything, the ego can take anything and turn it into an objective. This is how I'm going to get to peace. Right. Um, but I mean, but again, it's like we have to sort of pick, and we have to sort of take a tool, right? And you're saying, okay, here's this tool that he's using of saying yes to the things. And I especially love the idea that you put out there, which is he's trying to find the truth regardless of how his parts feel about it. To me, that's one of the most important things in listening to your intuition is your ego may not like it. Your ego may be terrified of it. But there's two systems. There's the egoic system, and then there's the deeper system underneath. We're trying to tap into the deeper system underneath and hear what that has to say and follow that. And it does not matter what this says. It may love the idea, it may hate the idea, but it doesn't get a vote. In terms of me, it's like I listen to it. And even more importantly, these days, I look at that one that's going, no, 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 no. And I say, okay, here's a part that needs my attention because it's seeing a threat where none exists. Because if the truth of my being is saying this is the way to go, then there's no sort of harm in this direction. And if this thing is so scared of me moving toward my greatest good, what's going on over here? And then this notion, it gets a little tricky when you get into this notion of defines what I am. I would say that's an interesting one because you are who you are, Susie, and there's nothing you can do or say that can really change that. You are this magnificence at your core. Certainly, it can define who you are in this world, your personality, your avatar, if you will. Are you a reliable person or not a reliable person? And whether you're reliable or not, it actually doesn't affect your true worth at all. And that's one of the things that we're digging down to here is it doesn't matter if we succeed or fail on this plane. It doesn't take away from the magnificence of what we are. And the people who are struggling and suffering the most are the people who are believing things about themselves that are the least true. I was speaking with somebody this morning. They were saying, I have no money. And I was like, okay, is that true? Is it true that you have no money? And they said, well, struggling lately. Yeah, but is it true that you have no money? It's like, of course, it's not the case. And when we get caught up in speaking lies out of our mouth, believing lies, that's how we stay stuck. That thing that is pushing for and believing that I don't have enough or that I have too little or whatever it is, that's actually the thing that's causing whatever scarcity there is, because it's not in alignment with the truth of our being. All right, well, that seems like a good place to stop. That was a really, really good and interesting chapter. I mean, so far, we've had plenty to talk about in all of them, haven't we? And lots of good stuff. So, any final thoughts or questions from anybody? Okay. Well, thank you all for being here. I was very resistant to the book club in the beginning, but now I'm starting to enjoy it because it's a place. This is the place I think in our community where we get to talk about these deeper things without, without it being so imminently practical.
I love
But again,
love-
as I say, there's nothing
Yeah.
more practical than this stuff. There's nothing more practical than knowing who you really are. What could be more practical than understanding your real value in the world?
Thank you. Exactly.
Thanks, Angie, for starting.
Yeah, Angie, thank you.
Thank
right.
you. Thanks,
Have a great
everybody.
one.
You all.
Thank
All
you.
right, cheers.
Thank
Be
you.
well.
Thanks, Angie.
Be well.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye,
Be
Raj.
well.
Bye, Mary. Bye, Adelia.
Bye, bye,
Bye,
bye.
Heather. Bye, Natasha. Bye, Angie. Woo. See you later.